Welcome to episode 12 of the Authoritative Coach podcast. In this episode, we're really bringing this whole season to a close, and I'm going to be speaking to you about the difference between when to use question first and lead to self-discovery, and when we need to actually state something as the coach. So we're going to look at two different types of approaches here with the intention that we're really trying to help our clients avoid known and predictable mistakes. So how do we do that in a coach-like way? How do we do that in an empowering way? How do we do it in a way where we can bring our expertise to the table to make sure our clients can do their best work at their highest potential? Let's get into it. So we're coming to the end of the season. There's one more episode, which is going to be a finale with an interview with a special guest. And we're going to do that at the end of every season. So look out for that episode coming out next week. But it's been a lot of fun sharing these lessons with you. I was reading a post just yesterday about something to do with bamboo and how it grows underground for like years and years before it's ready to sprout, and it kind of sprouts very, very quickly, very high. I'm not an expert in bamboo, as you can tell, but I feel like this has been somewhat of a similar project. There's been thousands of hours of coaching, especially in this peak in my career over the last 4 years or so. Thousands of hours of coaching, a lot of thinking, practice, mistakes over the last 10 years or so. And all that has gone, as much as I've been working with my clients, it's sort of gone mostly unnoticed to the rest of the world. And now I feel like, having worked through this last season of the podcast, ready to share it all with you. And that's very much my style. I quite like that style, is to go do something, to, you know, when you're reading all these books and you're getting all this advice and guidance from all these different resources, to take it all in and then go do something with it, figure it out, make it my own. Then it's ready to talk about and share, rather than what we see from most people as a sort of regurgitation of stuff we're reading. So you read something and you immediately want to make it your own. But I've learned myself that the best thing to do is to actually internalize it first and then do something with it and make it your own. Seneca says this in his letters from a Stoic, which is to turn our words into works and to make it our own. So to sort of paraphrase there, it's like, instead of like regurgitating stories and quotes and theories from others and other resources, is to actually take action, put it into practice, make it your own, and then share that. What I find a lot of people doing is they share what they're going to do. Oh, I've got this goal, I've got this thing that I want to do, I'm going to go do it. Or they share what they're doing. I've made this decision, I'm doing this thing. But actually the best story and the best thing to share, I think, is none of that. It's what happened after. Looking back on it. And there's a great magazine out here in the UK called Delayed Gratification, and they report on the news 3 months after the news has been published. So they're like looking back and saying, well, what's actually worth your attention? What's actually worth sharing? And it's a similar to what's going on here as well. It's like going through all this work and actually picking out what's useful that I can share with you. And that is, to me, more interesting than anything, is to just hold on. Don't share it too early. Do the work and then produce it. Yes, you'll have to do the work when no one's looking. And that can be quite tough sometimes. It can be also be quite tough to hold on to that idea of delayed gratification and, you know, give yourself a pat on the back for the work you're doing and not get recognition from others. That can be difficult too, but it's way more valuable and way more worth it, I think, anyway. So that's my take on it. And so I'm going to just give you a little bit of an insight into what's happened with the podcast here before we get into this week's coaching question of the week. Like I said, this is the final episode in the series, and I'm going to do one more interview with a special guest, and then I'll be taking a break. Now, why would I do that? So what I've learned over the last 10 years, I used to do a podcast series a long time ago. It was weekly. A lot of things, I think, default to weekly. Like, I'm going to do a weekly letter. I'm going to do a weekly podcast. I'm going to do a weekly whatever. But what you find is, after you've done many, many weeks in a row, you start to get onto this treadmill, and sometimes it becomes like a grudge, or you start to resent that work that you're having to do every single week. What I've found to work for me is to work in seasons and build it around things like vacations and other things that are going on in my life and give myself a break. So for the podcast, for example, I'm going to be taking a break, which allows me to do a few things. It allows me to take a vacation. It allows me to think. It allows me and the team to actually do a post-mortem. What's working well? What's not working well? What can we do differently or better in the next season? And then it allows me to record maybe the first 4 or 5, or at least batch out all the episodes that I want to record in the next season. And so this is a great way to kind of manage your schedule around creating content if you're a creator, is to think in terms of seasons, start dates, end dates, and then having breaks that allows you some space just to kind of prepare for what's next. And it also allows you to decide if, like, actually we're done here and there is no other season and you want to move on to something else. So it gives you that, I don't know, just the ability to control your own schedule around these things. And I find that to be really useful for me. One of the people that really inspired me around this was Paul Jarvis. I don't know if you've heard of him. It doesn't really matter if you've heard of him or not. But if you have heard of him, you'll know what I'm talking about, is that he would communicate very explicitly to his audience through his letter that he would take the whole summer off to be with his kids, to be with his family, whatever, and that his email letter would start again in the winter months. And he would tell his audience this, and he made it work for him. And so if there was any advice I could give you for producing content on a weekly basis, is build it into seasons. I do exactly the same thing with my email letter. If you're not subscribed, jump into the show notes and get on the list. I do exactly the same thing. I'll do a season, probably about 12 weeks. Then I'll take a break and then I'll come back fresh and ready for the next season. And it always gives me the opportunity to go back, think about what I can improve, but it also gives me the option and other people in the team an option to say, actually, this has ran its course and we want to move on to something else, which is totally fine too, right? So anyway, I digress, but I wanted to just, with this being the final episode, I thought it'd be good just to give you a bit of behind the scenes on what's actually happening here and how I'm approaching this work that I'm doing here. The key thing for me is that when I come here to share something with you, it has to be something that I've tried, I've done something with, I've made mistakes with, and I've seen the benefits and value of it, versus just sharing with you stuff that you could read in any book. This is coming directly from my experience as a coach and as a teacher as well. So it comes from the work I'm doing with clients, and it comes from the work that I'm doing with coaches, and I'm putting it all together here for you. So I digress. Let's get into coaching question of the week for this week. So you'll know by now that my style is what we call question first style. In other words, I'm leading with questions. I'm leading with curiosity. I am making the other person or the other people that I'm working with the hero of the story, right? I want it to be about self-discovery and ownership of the thing. I want people to go away and do it. I don't want them to be completely dependent on me to do all the things. And I want them to think and I want them to learn. And that's one of the things I hold on to a lot of the times as a coach is who's doing thinking, right? Am I doing all the thinking? Because if that's true, then I'm probably not being the best coach that I can be. So I want to delegate that thinking back. I also want to make sure that they work through their problems themselves as well. And you've heard me talk a lot about that. And if you've been reading my letter, you'll see a lot of that in there. It's like, don't do all the thinking for your clients. Get them to think for themselves. And the way we do that as coaches is, of course, we use a lot of questions and self-discovery to do that. Now, the thing is, though, it's not always appropriate to use self-discovery and questions. And we have to know when it's appropriate and when it's not. And so there's, broadly speaking, if you as the coach get a sense that there's self-awareness in there somewhere, that the answer is in them, then using questions to get them there is probably the best route. However, there's times where that's not appropriate, and that's what this episode's all about. It's like, how do we maintain our coaching style in a way where we're probably going to state a lot of things. However, there are times where self-discovery and leading with questions just isn't going to work. So there's obvious ones, like, for example, something that's a clear standard, right? Something that is a standard for the work that you're going to do that they would just not know unless they had read it somewhere or you had told them, right? So you need to communicate a statement that's a standard, or something that's well-known, something that's a fact, right? That's also something that you wouldn't waste any time self-discovering or using questions to lead this to self-discovery. What we want to use self-discovery for is to bring about self-awareness around something that they then can own. And often there's times where that's just not going to be appropriate. And you'll know when this is true or you'll know that leading with questions isn't really working for you and your client when it becomes frustrating, when they start to get annoyed, when they get irritated, when they feel like it isn't leading anywhere, right? Remember the 3 Ps of questioning, which is that we want to feel like we're making progress, that the questions have some type of purpose, and we're really getting to the priority, and that there's some thinking going on for the client, right? There's some element of we're going somewhere with this, and we're getting to self-discovery. And what was interesting for me was I was on a call yesterday with some client-facing professionals and some coaches, and it was Winnie actually that mentioned this. Is like, so what do you do if you see them taking a right turn off a cliff? Do you do self-discovery there? Do you ask questions, or do you just tell them what you see? Do you state it? And how do you state it in a way that's helpful? And of course, this is absolutely our job as coaches and as client professionals, is to point out the mistakes that our clients are making. And if you remember back to one of the other episodes that I talked about, Kim Scott's radical candor framework, right? The quadrants. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You can always look it up if you want to, or jump into the comments section to go to the episode where I talk about it. Or there's a great 6-minute video from Kim Scott just really explaining the framework. But essentially, our job as experts is to see many steps ahead of the client and know what mistakes they will make. And you have a choice to decide how you're going to approach this, right? Now, 80% of the people that I've worked with, generally speaking, naturally gravitate towards being ruinously empathetic, which means that they'll see that there's something wrong here. They know that this little thing could lead to a bigger problem, but they don't highlight that problem or mistake, and instead they ignore it or they sweep it under the carpet, mostly because they don't want to have a difficult conversation with them, with the client, and they're somewhat protecting their own feelings, right? They don't want to feel awkward about it. It's difficult for them. But the bridge from ruinous empathy over to being radically candid is found in getting over your need to be liked by your client. And that's a hump that we all need to overcome if we want to be highly effective communicators and if we want to be truly valuable to our clients. And it's somewhat shifting from this idea of like being their friend and over to being a professional. And that's the shift that we're trying to make. So regardless if you know about Kim Scott's radical candor framework or not, we're going from like to respected, we're going from friend to professional. So really, if you think about it, why would someone hire a professional, right? They want to get there better. They want to get there faster. They want to get there, do their work at their highest potential. And so it's our job really to point out the mistakes that they're making, to be many steps ahead of our client so that they avoid these problems, right? So they go in with their eyes wide open. Even if they do decide to drive off the cliff, at least they knew what could happen. They got the truth from you, at least while they were there, right? So we're straddling this challenge of knowing when to lead with questions and knowing when to state the thing. And I'm going to give you some of my stock statements to use when I'm trying to help a client see a mistake that they're going to make. If you're going to take away, and before I even get into that, I think we want to be able to shift into this mode. I say mode, we should be in this mode all the time, but we want to be able to do this very quickly, immediately, in the moment. You can see a client's making a mistake, they're making a decision, or there's a behavior that's getting in the way of doing their best work, and you want to call it out. Nobody else is going to do this work. Oftentimes people aren't challenged in their organization that you're working with because they're too friendly with each other, there's internal politics, you have to work with that person every single day. The advantage that you have of being outside of their organization is you can be quite direct in calling out what you see, right? A big part of our job actually is just to say what we see, to call it out, right? There's a great book called The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols, right? I've got a few quotes I'm going to read off the screen here. There's 2 quotes in the book that he refers to. They're by different people. An expert is someone who knows some of the worst mistakes that can be made in his subject and how to avoid them. That was Werner Heinsberg. And also, an expert is someone who has made all the mistakes which can be made in a very narrow field. And that was Niels Bohr. Okay, so this idea of what an expert is kind of emphasizes the point that I made earlier, is that that's what makes us experts. The fact that we've worked with many, many clients, we've seen many projects, we've seen success and failure, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And our value as experts is to be able to bring that to the table with our clients. That's a lot of the value that we bring, is that we've been around long enough to know, even if that's just a year or two, it's much longer than the client. The client may have only ever done one or two projects like the that are similar to what you're doing just now, but you've done dozens, right? So you've seen it all. You've seen the spectrum. And every time we start a relationship with a client or do a new project, we want to do it better than we did before. So we're constantly improving as well. And it's our job to think about it, not like think about what good looks like and what the standard is. And we need to bring that too. And so how do we do this? Now, of course, there are some allowable mistakes that you want your client, that your client have to make sometimes. I had a client just this week who had made a mistake. I could almost see it coming, but they had to somewhat go through it to really see what the real problem was. And it was helpful actually to reflect on it and say, what went wrong here? How is this behavior actually holding us back from growing our business? It was more of it became a broad business lesson than a specific thing. So sometimes there's some allowable mistakes, I think, that you want your client to make so they can learn and they can grow. However, there's some predictable mistakes that you don't want them to make that's going to really hamper their ability to actually make progress. So how do you simultaneously empower your clients, create self-discovery, lead with curiosity, but somehow help them avoid the most common mistakes as well? And here's the coaching statements or phrases that I use that are really helpful. And the where this comes from is you've got to channel your expertise here. You've got to channel the mistakes that you've seen in the past. You also have to channel, I think, certainly helps me, is what I just don't want to have happen, right? So there's just think about all the bad experiences you've had with clients and think, I don't want to have to go through that again. How can I make sure that doesn't happen here? And so the coaching statements or phrases that I use are things like, what we don't want to have happen is, what history has shown us is, in my experience, what I've found to be true is. And it'll be variations of those statements that help me frame my expertise, to frame my authority, to frame my credibility into this work. Having watched dozens of clients do this, this is what we don't want to have happen, right? And even if, like I said, even if they do decide to take that route anyway and drive off the cliff, at least they know they can come back to you and say, yeah, we could have predicted this. In fact, Chris, you even told us about this. And maybe they'll listen to you more in the future. Now, if you do believe, though, that there's somewhat the ability to get self-discovery around it, you can use questions like, okay, I can see the decision you're making here. Now, what would failure look like? What could cause us to fail? What could a roadblock or a challenge be? What's the worst case scenario? You could use questions like that to help coach them to self-discovering that actually this might not be the best way to tackle this. And in some ways, what you're holding on to there as a coach is that I don't want to have to, in this, it could be a specific example, but you're just sort of, I'm not in a position to tell them what's right and wrong here. But I do want to make sure that they've thought through some of these things to make sure they are making the right choice or the right decision or they're taking the right path. What problems could hold us back from being successful here? What could get in our way? So you can create a coaching conversation with the client just to make sure they've thought through it fully, okay? So this could be anything from you're seeing a client trying to do too much at once, they're trying to do something on the cheap, they're trying to short circuit a process, they think they know best, but you've seen it dozens of times. They're doing something that is going to potentially lead to them not doing their best work, slowing things down, costing them more money, whatever it might be. And so you're going to get ahead of that. You're many, many steps ahead of the client. We'll always have to be many steps of the client. We have to be able to see it more clearly than the client, to be able to say it more clearly than the client. And so the value we bring is that we're many steps ahead at all times, and we bring our experience and we predict what could go wrong. And so we don't necessarily have to drop our empowering coaching style, but we do have to tell them what could go wrong. And oftentimes that really comes back to not using self-discovery and actually using statements. What I've seen happen is, in my experience, so we get used to using these phrases, and like I said, it's how can you get to that really quickly. So right in the moment, they say they're going to do something, you can just say, well, what I know to be true based on working with dozen clients here, this is what could happen. We don't want to have that happen here, do we? And so you can really state it and then move into a conversation with them. So we can bring our experience, we can bring new information, we can help our clients make better, more informed decisions, and get ahead of predictable, known mistakes. In an ideal world, that's what a coach is, right? A coach is, right from the beginning, setting the client up for success, making sure they don't make the mistakes that everybody else would make if they hadn't hired a coach or a professional to take them through this process, right? They may as well do it on their own if they're going to make the same mistakes. That's not why they're here. So, final thing here, as we wrap up this season, is to also communicate it with conviction. Okay, so there's a difference between, I don't know. I feel like maybe this could be a mistake. Versus, Chris, having worked with dozens of clients on a similar project, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. What experience has shown me is that if we decide to do it this way, if we decide to short circuit the process here, what is likely to happen is X, Y, Z. To make them see that there's something at stake here, that you're not prepared to work with a failed project. You're not willing to work with a client going through these mistakes. What's at stake? It's like you've got to lift it up so that the client gets a sense that, oh, Chris is actually really serious about this. And this sounds important. This sounds like something we should take seriously. So bring the energy to it. Communicate with conviction that there's something at stake here, not just for the client, but for you too. And oftentimes for me, that comes from a place of me I don't want to work through this mistake with the client. So it has to come out of me. Like I see this as important. I'm committed to not making this mistake. And so if you can do it that way as well, it'll influence the client much more, I think, with that gravity of what's really at stake. I hope you've enjoyed this season. I've had a lot of fun bringing this to you, and I'm looking forward to the next season. Look out for our next episode where I'm interviewing a special guest, and I'll see you in season 2. Bye for now.